create a web app that will combine the functional web application using audio processing and AI models, and it will create something kind of unique. And this is the end result, what we'll end up with. So as you can see, this is a content aspect of it, and it gives the user an option to upload any audio file they want. For all intents and purposes, I'm just going to choose a random song from my computer. So I've chosen this song. You can see what is here. For this app, I've included also Russian and Spanish. So if you want to try doing songs that are in Russian or Spanish and you want the lyrics, this is the way to do it. So after choosing all of that, we click extract lyrics. So after clicking extract lyrics, we'll have to wait for a minute or two, because now in the background we will have the following processing happen. This song, which is an MP3 file, will get converted into a WAV file. Then we'll have the lyrics extracted. As you can see, they just popped up here. Then we will communicate to OpenAI's API to have a summary of the transcribed text. So it will express the general meaning, the sentiment of it. And then the idea is that this particular summary will be forwarded as a prompt to OpenAI's API to produce an image inspired by this particular summary. So that is what the end product will look like. And now we can explain high level what is going on in the background and how this project works. So just initially, I want to show that with the file structure, what we'll be working with here is just the main PY. So we are doing the backend here. Everything else you will just get from my GITrepo. I'll show you in a minute how to do that. So the front end, the index.html, the static files, these will all come from the GITrepo. And then these two folders will just be there to manage all the files that we'll be working with. So irrelevant to talk about now. And you will also have to create your .env to provide the OpenAI's API key of yours. And the conventional requirements.txt is just a file that I will include in the GITrepo to make sure you have all the dependencies required for your project. So like I've said, everything here is pretty much irrelevant other than our main.py. So all of this will come from the GITrepo, and we will just call the main py. So on a high level, what will happen is, you saw with the front end, the user has the option to use a file. So this file, user uploads an .mp3 file. Once this particular event happens, so this is matched with this, we initiate the conversion of an mp3 file into WAV. So this particular line here, so that we will call, let's say, event number 2. So once that is completed, we initiate our audio transcription. So this is us extracting the lyrics and providing them back to the user. So let's say this is our step number 3 here. With number 4, you saw that in the summary of the transcribed text, we will extract the general meaning, the sentiment, and then provide that to the front end as well. So our backend event number 4 is the text summarization, and it provides this summarized text. So as you can see, that goes within our number 4 here, text summarization, showing the summarization of the transcribed text into a concise sentence. And then lastly, the idea at least is that we will create some kind of an image that is inspired by the lyrics of the text. So just for the sake of the project, this tutorial is supposed to teach you about this backend architecture that's kind of event driven, and it combines usage of different APIs, so API integration for a specific purpose. But you can modify this however you would like, based on what you would like as an outcome here. I just wanted to show you the way to do it. So I thought, all right, the best way maybe would be to, rather than just take the whole lyrics and try to create an image, I'll create some kind of a text summary, which we saw here with the step number 4. And then that will be the prompt to create an image out of it. Once we prompt OpenAI with this summarized text, that image will be generated and the result displayed back to the client. So to reiterate, the events we want to implement in our architecture is the following sequence. So the user uploading the MP3 file through a web interface. So in the backend, then the conversion to a different file type will happen. So after this processing is complete, we will actually extract the text from the file. That text through OpenAI's API will be summarized in one concise sentence. Then we will use that to prompt OpenAI's API to generate an image, and that image will be displayed to the user. And that's the end of the sequence of events for our backend. So this is the high-level overview of our project here. With all of that being said, now we can go into implementation. So the first thing you want to do is go to the GitHub link, the following link that will be provided in the description, and it will land you in this lyrics start repo, and you want to copy this and go into your VS Code. So once you've done your git clone and you land with this exact file structure, we'll be working in this main.py and build the rest of the app. But first, before we do that, we'll go through what you get here. So you're just familiar with what's happening with the front end and the remaining of the files and folders here. So I'll go from left to bottom. So this is for now an empty folder where we will store the converted files, meaning that we will take a .mp3 file, convert it into a WAV file and store it there. With the media, this is the place where the pictures, like the images that are generated with our AI, will be stored before they are displayed on the front-end client. Static will just hold our CSS, and maybe if we want to include a logo for our front end. In the templates, we'll have our front end, like the HTML file written, and we'll go through each of the elements just to make sure, even though this project is not meant to teach front end in any way, shape or form, but we'll still go through it so that we can reference what goes where. As we code the backend, we want to understand why a particular function or logic from the backend is influencing something in the front end. And then with the uploads, I believe this will be the place where we store the initial chosen files, so the MP3 files. So git ignore, it's just here once I push this to git. I don't want to push some of the stuff that's sensitive or that I just don't need in a repo. And if you want to read more about the actual project, the README file here is exactly for that. It actually explains all the features of the project and the specifications, like the tech stack used, and it just gives the overall how it works. So without further ado, we will actually get the link, go back to our VS Code. You can create a new folder, it doesn't matter, but we will git clone this into your working directory. So doing git clone and giving the link of the repo. We have this folder now, so we'll cd into it. So the first thing you want to do is install everything from your requirements.txt. So just like with the other projects, we'll create a virtual environment. So this is your command for it. Let me see, maybe you can't see it over there. So python mvnv.vnv. Once you do that, you will see a new folder in your working directory .vnv. So you want to go and activate that. I prefer opening PowerShell, but it's really up to you which terminal you use to do that. So you want to make sure that you're in the folder and you want to access it all the way into scripts and then activate PS1, and this is fine. So now we have everything activated and we want to install all of our dependencies. So you have the requirements.txt file here. You just want to type in pip install our requirements like this and just let this run. So this will now install all the dependencies, and whilst this is happening, we can just start writing our backend code here. So the first thing we will do is import everything that we need. So I'm going to copy paste all of the stuff and just break it down quickly. So this is everything from FastAPI that we'll be using. We'll be using Pydantic. We are implementing this particular, so for templating, this allows us to render the HTML page. We don't want any issues with CORS, so we'll import CORS middleware. OS is to be able to manipulate files, to work with files, because as you saw, we have to upload an audio file from our device. Then the remainder here will just help us work with the image that's displayed and the audio processing. .env is important because we don't want to include any sensitive information by hard coding it in our code, in something that you might push to repo or share with other people. So this is a dependency that will allow us to store it securely. Logging, not the most important thing, but I like to have it as I build these projects. If I encounter situations where I'm building something new and I want to troubleshoot, logging helps a lot. Speech recognition will help us with audio processing. And then finally, we are using OpenAI and requests to make these. So requests for HTML protocol requests and OpenAI to communicate with our OpenAI API. So that's all of our dependencies and imports. If you want, you can pause the video and just make sure you write this exact same thing. So we move on. We will create a .env file. So you want to make sure that it's in your working directory. So you want to write this OpenAI API underscore key equals, and then you want to include your API. So your API key from OpenAI. So I'm going to do this off screen, and you can do exactly the same. Once you have done that, now we can actually import that variable. So we will write load.env. We will say that our Open API key is OS, meaning the import that deals with files. As you saw earlier in the line 7 here, this import OS. So we are accessing that and saying get environment variable, and then we're giving the name of the variable. So now we can use that securely. We want to initialize our FastAPI app. So we'll say FastAPI. If need be, here we will use logging. So we can configure that later if we have to. That can stay as a to-do. So we want to mount our static files. So our FastAPI app needs to know where to look for our static files. If you look on the left-hand side, we have our folder static, and that's the place where we will direct our FastAPI to look. So at the moment over there, you have the CSS, and I've just included this logo from my YouTube channel. So all we have to do is say, look for it in this particular folder, and we'll say that those are the static files called static with name static. Now we want to be able to render our HTML page. So we will do templates and say the directory of it is templates. Just as we have the directory static, underneath we have templates, and that's where our HTML file is. So now is a good moment for us to open that frontend and see what we have there. As we said, we will not be doing a tutorial on anything frontend related, but we want to make sure that you understand once you're writing the backend code, what does it pertain in terms of the frontend. So in your templates, index.html, open that, and we'll just quickly do a breakdown. So that's not really relevant. So this is just us saying the text of it. It's a lyrics extractor. So in our main, we have a form which will allow a user to upload an MP3 file. So we are saying choose an MP3 file. And then in the input type, we specify that it is like the ID file. So the type is file, and it accepts .mp3. Then we allow these three. So you have these three options. And if you remember, it's a drop down between 3 languages, English, Russian, and Spanish. So then we have a button that submits this form. Once that button is submitted, we have some JavaScript here in this script tag that does that work for us. So once the submit button is clicked, the extract lyrics, this is the event that's triggered, and we execute a post request to our endpoint that we will define in our main.py file. So that's something that we will do now. That's not something that exists here, but ahead we are referencing that in our JavaScript logic here. So the Ajax code. It is pretty much similar. I believe in the previous tutorial we used fetch, and it's different, but it works on the same principle where we are defining the endpoint address, we are defining the type of the HTML request that we are doing. Then we are doing this JSON stringify to make sure that it's in adequate data form where we are expecting a response as well. So that's the JavaScript there. And as you can see, there is not much to the front end other than just these couple of elements that will accordingly display the different content as it's generated. So that's why we have these respective HTML elements. They're pretty self-explanatory. I don't think we need to discuss this furthermore, and we should focus on what matters more, which is the front end. So, oh, by the way, I don't want to forget, also in our static, we have some CSS just to make this app a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. But once again, not a front-end tutorial. So if you feel like exploring it a bit, studying it, by all means do that. And we will now focus again on our back end. So this is where we left off, and this is something that I just copy-paste from the documentation of FastAPI. There's always the same thing used for me, just to make sure that there is no cause issues. So for data validation, I might use just a particular schema. So I'm going to say that the lyrics payload inherits base model, and it's just one variable which will be a string. So to keep things a bit more organized, we might as well create a file, and we can call this schemas.py, and we will chuck this there. So we want to make sure we import Pydantic for this. And then going back to our main, we can go on the bottom here of the imports and just say import, or we can say from schemas import lyrics payload. So One thing when it comes to managing these different directories here where we will be storing content that's dynamically generated, I like to include some code that helps the logic of it by making sure that certain directories exist before it executes logic where it's supposed to save something in that folder. So just in case things get scrambled later on, if you're playing around, tinkering around with this project or any other project, I like to include something like this. So I say if this is null, and I will give the name of our converted files folder, we'll do os make this, so it will create a directory called this. So now if I just run this python main.py, you can see that it has created converted files folder. So if it doesn't exist, it creates it. If it exists, this becomes obsolete. I like to have it. So we can define our endpoints now. So we will have a get endpoint that will first render the HTML page. So this will be the response class of HTML response, and it can asynchronously call this method read root, which will just render the HTML page from our templates. So it will give return templates, template response, index.html, and also request. So leave that empty for now. So with this, we can already test that this runs as we need it to. So if we go into our terminal and type in ubicorn main reload, we can see that it's running. So if you open your browser and check localhost 8000, we can see that we have the front end rendered. So nothing here will work because there is no backend that this can communicate with yet, but we know that so far so good, everything is working as intended. So going back to our backend, we can continue with our other endpoints. So we just create something like, we'll call it roots. So now what we want to do is create the endpoint where the button will go. So once the user clicks submit, we want to upload that file so we can initiate the processing of the audio file. So we'll say endpoint upload file and asynchronously called create upload file. So this will take in file as a part of the request, and also the language that we want the text to extract into. And this is a string. So we want to make sure, just like we previously made sure that we created a directory called converted files, now we want to create a directory uploads where we'll store all the files that the user chooses to upload. So let me just copy paste this bit actually. And this can be indented, but there'll be a difference in the name of the actual file. So it'll be called uploads. So as soon as the first time we actually try to communicate with this endpoint, then this logic will be executed and it will create our uploads folder. So next we want to store the file location, so the actual path. So as you can see in our file location variable here, we are storing this as an f string, and we'll say with open and then give it the file location as file object, and we want to write file read like so. So now we're going to be doing our audio processing. So for this, we'll say that WAV location of the file is, and then we'll do an f string, and we'll basically give it the same path as the mp3, but with just replaced extension. So it's not going to be .mp3, it's going to be .vav. Remember, this is not modifying a file, this is just giving the location of where we want to save the processed file, the converted file. Hence we are just effectively changing the name, just changing the string. And then now we want to call a function that will convert mp3 to .wav. So to do that, we'll create a new file, we'll call it utility py, and in here now we'll write some logic that will actually do the conversion of that. So we will call this convert mp3 to wav. So this will take a parameter of a path of mp3 and wav. So I will say that audio is audio segment from mp3 and then the mp3 path, audio export. Now we give the wav path and format wav. And at this point, I want to make sure this actually happened successfully. So I will go back and implement the logging that I was talking about. So earlier, remember I said that if need be, we can use logging here, and I think it need be. Not just that it's necessary, but I believe it's good practice and it will help me stay ahead of any potential problems that might occur by telling me exactly where my problem is rather than me having to spend time on troubleshooting. So we'll configure that by saying logging basic config level logging info. So we'll create a similar imports in our utility file. So what we'll need is logging. We will need this for audio processing. I'll copy these as well. So speech recognition, OpenAI requests, OS, and I believe that's all we need for now. These two, actually, let me do all of these. So if you want to pause and have a look at everything that I put here, so to make sure that you are on the same page. At the moment, it might be a bit redundant, but I'm trying to be time efficient as well and just making sure that I get everything. If there is an extra line here, it's not really a major problem for me now, as long as I get everything working. So back to our function. After this has happened, I want to get some kind of a message that will confirm this. So for that, I'm going to say logging.info and then just inform converted MP3 to WAV and give it the path of where it has happened. This will also let me know of the location of my file if for whatever reason I need to see it at that moment. Whilst we are here, we'll do another function, and this one will be to segment the file. So the reason why is only later I realized that OpenAI has a limit on the size of the file that you can give it to transcribe. So the go around method for this, the first thing I thought of, and by the way, there might be better ways, but I don't think it's necessary for the scope of this project. So what I do, I just split the audio in segmented parts in small chunks and then transcribe them one by one in smaller parts. And once it finishes, it comes up as text anyway. It's very easy just to join and display to the user. So it works quite fine. So you want to write function split audio, and it will again take the path of our converted file. And then we'll say that the chunk length can be this particular length of milliseconds. So we are splitting the entire file divided by, so if it's 5 minutes, it's going to be however many milliseconds in 5 minutes divided by 60,000. And we'll say that the chunk path is chunk index WAV. No, this is the wrong line. Going back on this, we don't need the path. We need to actually define what our chunks are. So quick re-edit, and we say the chunks is audio, and we want to define that audio above actually. So going one line above that, we'll say that our audio is audio segment, and then from WAV and giving it the path of our WAV file. Now we're going to take this audio variable and do some slicing here. So we'll take the index plus chunk length for I in range of 0 and give it the length of the audio, and then pass chunk length milliseconds. And this will return. So this will then split the audio physically into smaller segments, and then we want to transcribe each individual audio segment. So we will create a new function. So this will be transcribe audio chunk, and then this will take individual chunk and the chunk index, and we'll give it the path of each individual chunk. So we'll say that this is chunk and then the chunk index. So finally exporting these individual chunks. So and giving it the format WAV. So with this, we'll say try open chunk path as audio file. So now this needs to travel to our OpenAI API to get transcribed, and we will be using the model called Whisper 1. So I already prepared some code for this, and we can just copy paste it. If you need to, after you see the copy paste, you can pause the video and make sure you have the same thing. So we'll write an exception, store it as E, and then we'll again utilize logging to say that some kind of an error has occurred. And then we can actually inform what particular chunk caused the problem by passing the chunk index as the error. So we can give it the finally, and we can remove all the chunk files. So it's just a cleanup of after the processing has finished, and we will return the text. So we are still working on our transcribing methods. So we have written the first two. We can minimize them to make this a bit more readable and write our third one. So this one will transcribe the WAV to text. So you can take the path, and the chunks here will be the audio of the path of the file. Full text here is just an empty variable, an empty string as a placeholder, and we will write a for loop saying for I and chunk in enumerate. So going through all the chunks, we'll say that the chunk text, and then we will call the previous function of transcribing audio chunk. We'll pass chunk file and the chunk index. So now we want to make sure that we join in our full text transcription from each individual chunk of the video. So we will give chunk text plus an empty space, just a placeholder. So after this, we can do logging info and just inform what the outcome is. So we'll actually see it, for example, in the terminal here. And finally, we just want to return the full text, and you will use some string manipulation to strip. So these are the three methods that we will need to successfully do transcribing of the audio files. Now we can move on to the last method that we will include in our utility.py, and this will be the one that will provide with the summary of the lyrics. So if you remember, in our front end, we have the extracted lyrics that will display the entire transcription of the audio file, and then below it's the summary of the transcribed text. So what will provide that summary is what we will do right now. So it will be another asynchronous method. We'll give it an appropriate name. This will take in the parameter of text, which will be the entire lyrics or transcription of the audio file. And we will take the similar approach like before. We will have try and accept, and the accept will perform the similar logic as before. So it will just perform some error logging, and this can just be text that says that some kind of an error has occurred, just keeping us know that if there is a particular problem, we don't need to do any troubleshooting. It will tell us that it was during the text summarization, and then this will return something. Just put summary generation failed. That will suffice. So in our try, we will use something similar from what we have done before, and I'm just going to copy paste this particular response variable. So we are communicating with OpenAI's API. So the model is ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo, and the prompt is just asking the OpenAI's API to do an assistant return of summarizing the following text in one sentence, and we are passing the variable of text, which, if you remember, in the parameter of this function is our audio transcription. After that, in our summary, we want to store the response and then just particularly define choices with index of 0 and with the message content, and just we want to strip this to make sure that it formats it for us, and then we can say logging for, and then this can be the generated summary displayed here for us. Just another way of keeping this good practice, and this returns summary. So that's all that we need in our utility.py. So with this, we can now return to the main py and make sure that all this is imported. So the first thing we'll do is write import utility.py, sorry, not py, import utility. So now we should be able to use all of the functions that we have defined. Oh, no, let me particularly name them. So from utility, we will import, and then we can do all of these functions. So it was summarize text, transcribe, another transcribe, split audio, and our last one, convert MP3. So now we know that we'll have access to all of them, and we can now focus on finishing all of our endpoints. So if you remember where we left off with the post endpoint for uploading the file, so what the user will do from the front end. So we gave the location for the WAV file. Remember, this is not some kind of logic that will do conversion or processing. It's just naming the new file and making sure that the extension is no longer .mp3. So now we will actually use one of the functions from utility.py that will do the transcription. Sorry, not transcription, conversion. So now we can call this function convert mp3 to WAV, and we will give it the file location, and we will now also give it the AV file location. Then after it's been successfully converted and stored in our converted files folder, we want to extract the lyrics. So we will use our transcribe function for that and give it the location of our newly converted file. And there is no need for us to keep the MP3 file that the user has uploaded, so we can use OS to actually delete that file. So for that, we'll give it the file location to our os.remove command. Now we want to create our summary, and for that we can use await and do summarize text. So this doesn't run in a way that can break the logic, so this will await for the previous functions to finish. This might take a certain amount of time, and there are factors, different factors that can differentiate what takes longer or more shorter time. So for example, obviously larger files will not take the same amount of time to create transcriptions. So await will make sure that these tasks are run in a sequential manner. And then lastly, we can just return that our lyrics are lyrics and the summary is variable summary. So now we can go to our front end and test some of this functionality. So I've just uploaded a random song and clicked the extract lyrics button to see what the output will be. And if I go back to my VS Code, we can see that we successfully delivered this payload to our endpoint, and our logging initiated all this information to be shown to us. So the backend has successfully done the conversion from MP3 to WAV, and then you can also see that the backend has successfully executed the utility.py methods, communicated with OpenAI's API to provide this transcribed text. So these are the lyrics from the song that I've uploaded. And then there was another call that has done a prompt to OpenAI's API again to create a summary from the previous text. And you can see that it's successfully done exactly that. So now what we're trying to do is make sure that we create an image that's inspired by this one sentence. And just to make sure, I can see that the backend has successfully done everything that I wanted, but I want to see has it all been displayed accordingly to my front end. And as you can see, it has exactly how we expected it. In the extracted lyrics box, we see the lyrics from the song that I uploaded, and then in the summary, we see our sentence again. So the final missing bit now is to create an image that's inspired by the summary of the transcribed text. So for that, we will create a new endpoint, and this one will be generate image. Again, it's a asynchronous method, and we'll call it generate image, and it will take the lyrics payload. So again, we will use the try and accept exception struct. So first, for how we will actually try to generate this image, we need to use our API key. So just like previous, we are using OS and getting the environment variable, and this is called OpenAI API key. And then just to make sure that we have some troubleshooting logic if something goes wrong, as this is common and good practice, we will write that in case a program is not able to access our API key, or if the API key variable is null, then we will say logging error, API key not accessible, found, not found. And we can raise an HTTP exception with a status code 500 and give it the same details. So we can say, just copy paste this, wasn't found. So now we can do the URL for the OpenAI's image generation. And I'm just going to copy paste this online. You can Google this. So once we have that link, I want to take this approach. In my headers, I'm going to pass the API key. And again, I have this documentation written in front of me, so I'm going to copy paste this part too. So what's going on here is that we are passing the API key as a part of our header, and that's the way OpenAI will verify that we have access to the API features. So for the prompt, we can do an F string and say that we want. So keep in mind as well, you can modify this, you can write this the best way you think will fit your project, or to be honest, most likely you can tinker around with this and create a better prompt than what I'm about to do, because I already tested this and the outputs are just very not artistic, to say the least. So I'm just going to create an image based on this summary of a song, maybe something like that. I don't know. You try playing around with it a little bit more if you want a more quality product, but we are here to demonstrate how an architecture like this is implemented. So we want to make sure that we don't get any errors in terms of, there are limits for OpenAI's API, how they can process a certain amount of text. So we will try to say that if the length of this prompt is greater than 1000 characters, then we will just truncate it and we will do prompt and then slice everything above 1000. So just to make sure that the image that arrives is within some acceptable dimension parameter, we'll say that is prompt, the size of the image, and this is relatively arbitrary, but feel free to play around with these dimensions if this means anything to you. but I'm quite happy with these dimensions, and we want just one picture, that'll suffice. So again, trying to keep up with the good practice of logging the information, we can do an F string and communicate to our server saying that we are sending the request to OpenAI API with the following data. We can include the data. So we can see actually what we sent the prompt with. And then we'll store the response and say that it's the request post, and then we'll pass the URL. Headers will be headers, and the JSON will be data. So this is what we are creating our request with, these parameters, and then storing the response that comes in the response variable. Again, we want to do some logging, and we will say that OpenAI API response status is, and then we can pass the response.status code. And we can also do logging.info, so some more logging for response content. So we will actually show all of that in the terminal here as the server is running. And we'll do raise for status. So the image, well, we want to store it and say that it's response.json. So in our data, list 0, and we extract the URL. So the response is image URL here. So we'll do a get request for that. And again, we'll do image response raise for status. So then we want to now show that image as in late in our front end. So we will say that image open, and then we'll use bytes.io image response content. And we want to use a similar approach before we did with creating that directories in case they're not there. So we'll say that if this particular folder does not exist, then we'll use OS to actually create that folder here, and our image path being os.path join, and we will use media and generated image PNG. So this will be the name for our image. You can, if for whatever reason want this to be different, change that and have it called whatever you want it really. So we want to save the image as the image path, and just to know that everything went fine here, we can do some logging and say we'll do an F string that image was saved at and give it the file path. And lastly, we return an object that will say that the image path is, and then the variable of image path. I believe that's pretty self-explanatory there. So we want to write some smart code, so we'll do accept requests.exceptions, request exception as error, and then in our logging we can pass that and say that request exception was the variable e, which will hold the error that has happened. And we want to raise an HTTP exception, and we'll give it the status code 500, the detail of error, and we just want to make sure that it's a string. So I had some issues before with this data being not the appropriate data type, so just want to preemptively put that there. And the last thing that we need to display our image, I'm going to show you in our front end. So as you can see here, this code with Ajax is going to do a post request to generate an image with the summary, so as a prompt. And then upon success, what we want to do is then actually fetch that image. So in order to show it, we need to communicate with our endpoint media generated image.png, and that's something that does not exist yet. So that'll be the last thing that we need to do, is to create a new get endpoint, and we'll call it generated image.png, and this will be another asynchronous method. We'll call it, give it an appropriate name, and all that this will do is return the file, which will be the image that we have just generated. So this will go into the media folder and fetch the image. And that should be all for our project. So now we can do some unit testing. So going to our front end, I'm going to choose a completely random song from my computer. I know it's in English language, so we will do extract lyrics. Looking in my VS Code, we can see that our logging utility is working fine and giving us information that the conversion from .mp3 to .wav has started. And when I look into my converted files, I can see that song is actually there. So as you can see, the backend has successfully transcribed the text, and it looks exactly like the lyrics of this particular song. And also then the second aspect of our backend has requested this summary. This text describes a sense of determination, resilience, and strength in the face of challenges, with a focus on survival and perseverance through difficult times. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So now we want to create an image, and we see that we got an error. So something is wrong with this particular aspect. We do not have our image yet. So we will do some troubleshooting and try to find why has this happened. So I can see a typo. If we go to our endpoint here, it's not supposed to be generate image, but rather generate underscore image. So we'll save and try doing it again. So I have the same song there. I'm just going to click extract lyrics. So the same lyrics will show up here, but what I'm expecting now is that with the generated image, there will be some kind of an image produced by OpenAI's ChatGPT that will be based on this particular summary. And looking at the VS Code's terminal, I can see now that it actually has executed the post request successfully. So as you can see here, the logging command has given us this information that the prompt has included the summary and the other parameters that we defined. So everything went fine here. We have the status 200 and the content then being the link of the image. So everything here looks fine. So now when I go back to my front end, I should be able to see this piece of artwork. And this is what he gave us. I don't know how is this inspired by this particular summary that you see here. This is bloody awful, but hey, it's not me. It's the current state of the art, isn't it? Let's try and see, maybe if we modify the prompt, can we get something more consistent with the actual summary. So previously the prompt was generate an image based on the summary of a song, and then we passed actual lyrics. Maybe we shouldn't do lyrics, we should do the actual summary. So let me try maybe writing a better prompt here. So I'm going to write something like, I have a song and I will summarize the lyrics from this song. I want you to generate a beautiful art based on this summary. Here is my summary of the text. So let's see, does this change anything? I'm not really an expert for this type of prompt engineering, especially for creating something artistic. That's probably the exact opposite of what I feel I have some kind of a talent for, but nevertheless, we shall try. So I will try and use the exact same song just to be able to compare. So this is our previous one, and let's see, has our new prompt made any type of an improvement. So once again, just going back to our backend, so you can see that all of the logging is doing its thing there, so we can follow along how this process is sequentially happening. Wow, this is even worse. So my prompt has made it considerably worse. So when it comes to art, this is definitely not producing the best results. And just for fun, I want to try and see how this same prompt will perform in ChatGPT's new model. So as a tangent to this project, we will actually take the exact same prompt, copy it, and chuck it in ChatGPT. So I think it'll be quite funny to see the massive difference between the model that we are using here. So this definitely needs a much better model rather than this particular one that my API is communicating with here. I'll leave that part up to you, and just to demonstrate what kind of a difference it can make, please have a look at the image that ChatGPT 4.0 has created from the exact same prompt. I think this is actually hilarious. So the difference is substantial from this. I don't even know what to call this previous one, but as you can see, I did a direct copy paste of the exact same prompt, and please read the summary and then look at the picture. I feel like, wow, this actually did create a very fitting image for the song. So as you can see, if you tinker around and implement a better model for this particular part of this project, you can get considerably better results. I'll leave that artistic aspect up to you. This particular tutorial, you've seen how to implement this architecture, and there is plenty of room for improvement upon your own personal preferences.